At the end of a cloudy afternoon, a blind girl is guided by her German shepherd to an empty street. On the uneven sidewalk, she grips the leash as if holding her own balance. Without warning, vehicles brake around them, silently encircling the two. A flash runs down the leash, and a shock makes the dog's body tremble. From a window, a resident closes the curtain but continues to watch, hidden. Soldiers advance, form a circle around the girl, and set up barriers. The dog, though stunned, places itself in front of her, and for a second, do you love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. On Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where the afternoon sun filtered through old oak trees and time seemed to move at its own gentle pace, nobody could have imagined that 12-year-old Sarah Mitchell and her German shepherd would become the center of attention that would grip the entire neighborhood. The tree-lined street had always been the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches and children rode bikes until the streetlights came on, where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses or the annual block party that brought everyone together with homemade apple pie and sweet tea. Sarah had been walking these familiar sidewalks for 3 years now, ever since her family moved to Cedar Falls from Chicago. Her fingers traced the worn leather of Max's harness as they made their way home from the public library, where she'd spent the afternoon listening to audiobooks and working on her homework with the help of Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who had become like a grandmother to her. Max, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and a coat that gleamed like burnished copper in the sunlight, moved with the precise confidence of a professionally trained guide dog. He had been Sarah's constant companion since she was 9, when her world had changed forever after the accident that took her sight, but not her spirit. The afternoon air carried the scent of barbecue from the Johnson family's backyard and the distant sound of children playing in Riverside Park. Sarah smiled as she recognized the familiar sounds of her neighborhood. Mr. Peterson washing his vintage Mustang in his driveway, the gentle creaking of Mrs. Garcia's porch swing, and the rhythmic sound of someone mowing their lawn. These were the sounds that made Cedar Falls home, that gave her a sense of place and belonging in a world she navigated by touch, sound, and the incredible partnership she shared with Max. Max suddenly slowed his pace, his ears perking up as they approached the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. Sarah felt the change in his posture through the harness, the subtle shift that told her something had caught his attention. She trusted Max completely. In the 3 years they'd been together, he had never led her astray. He had guided her safely around construction sites, warned her of low-hanging branches, and even once prevented her from stepping into a pothole that could have caused a serious fall. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, running her free hand through his thick fur. Max's tail wagged once, a quick acknowledgement of her voice, but his attention remained focused ahead. The sounds of the neighborhood seemed different somehow, though Sarah couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed. There was a quality to the silence that felt heavy, expectant, as if the very air was holding its breath. As they continued down Maple Street, Sarah became aware of other subtle changes. The usual sounds of afternoon life seemed muted, replaced by something she couldn't quite identify. There were footsteps, but they were measured, deliberate, unlike the casual stroll of neighbors going about their daily routines. She heard car doors closing with the solid thunk of official vehicles and voices that carried an authority she didn't recognize from her friendly neighborhood. Max's pace became even more deliberate as they approached the familiar stretch of sidewalk that led to Sarah's house. She could picture it perfectly in her mind. The white picket fence that her father had painted just last spring, the rose bushes her mother tended with such care, and the ramp that had been installed to make the front steps accessible for her. Home was just ahead, but something felt different about this ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The first sign that something was wrong came as a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. Sarah felt it through her feet, a vibration that made Max pause mid-step. Then came the sound she would remember for the rest of her life, a sharp, electric crack, followed by Max's sudden, startled yelp. The German Shepherd's body went rigid, every muscle tensing as an electrical current surged through his collar and harness. Sarah felt the shock travel up through the leash into her hand, a tingling sensation that made her gasp and stumble. Max whimpered, his powerful body trembling as he fought to maintain his composure despite the unexpected assault on his nervous system. In that moment, Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Max had never reacted to anything like this before. He was trained to be calm in every situation, to be her steady anchor in a world of uncertainties. "Max, what's wrong?" Sarah's voice cracked with concern as she knelt beside her companion, her hands frantically checking his neck and collar for any sign of injury. Max leaned into her touch, his breathing heavy, but his loyalty unwavering. Even in his confusion and discomfort, he positioned himself between Sarah and whatever unseen threat lay ahead. That's when Sarah became aware of the voices. They were closer now, and she could make out words spoken in clipped professional tones. "Target acquired," someone said, and Sarah's blood ran cold. Target? Were they talking about her, about Max? The very idea seemed impossible. She was just a 12-year-old girl walking home from the library with her guide dog. What could anyone impossibly want with them? Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through the confusion, shrill with indignation. "What in heaven's name do you think you're doing to that child?" The elderly woman's words were followed by the sound of her screen door slamming shut, then the heavier thud of her front door being closed with unnecessary force. Sarah heard whispered conversations from the porches and windows around her, the concerned murmurs of neighbors who had watched her grow up on this street. Max struggled to his feet, shaking off the effects of the electrical shock with the determination that made German Shepherds such excellent working dogs. He moved closer to Sarah, his warm body providing comfort and reassurance, even as his alert posture told her that danger was still present. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. "It's okay. A boy," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort Max or herself. "We'll figure this out." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that whatever was happening on Maple Street was far from okay. The electrical shock to Max's collar hadn't been an accident or a malfunction. Someone had done this deliberately, and that realization sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the Iowa autumn air. The sound of heavy boots on pavement grew closer, accompanied by the static crackle of radio communications. Sarah strained to hear what was being said, but the voices were too low, too professional, speaking in codes and abbreviations that meant nothing to her. All she knew was that her peaceful walk home had turned into something she didn't understand, something that had brought uniformed officials to her quiet street and caused someone to hurt her beloved companion. As she sat on the sidewalk with Max pressed against her side, Sarah realized that the life she had carefully rebuilt after losing her sight was about to change again. The familiar sounds of Maple Street had been replaced by something ominous and uncertain, and she had no idea why. All she could do was hold tight to Max's harness and trust that somehow, together, they would find their way through whatever was coming next. The autumn wind picked up, rustling the fallen leaves that scattered across Maple Street like whispered warnings. Sarah remained seated on the sidewalk, her hand resting on Max's back as she tried to make sense of what was happening around them. The familiar neighborhood sounds had been replaced by an orchestrated symphony of official activity that made her stomach clench with anxiety. From her position on the ground, Sarah could hear car doors slamming in rapid succession. the heavy thud of vehicles much larger than the sedans and SUVs that usually grace their quiet street. The rumble of engines was deeper, more authoritative, accompanied by the static-filled chatter of radio communications that grew louder as more personnel arrived. She counted at least 6 different vehicles by their distinct engine sounds, and more seemed to be arriving by the minute. "Sarah, honey, are you all right?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Garcia from across the street, concern evident in every syllable. Sarah heard the familiar squeak of the woman's screen door opening, followed immediately by a sharp, authoritative voice. "Ma'am, please return to your residence immediately. This area is being secured for your safety." The tone was professional but unyielding, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "But that's just a little girl with her service dog," Mrs. Garcia protested, her voice rising with indignation. "What possible threat could a 12-year-old pose?" The response was cold and final. "Ma'am, I won't ask again. Please return inside and remain there until further notice." Sarah heard Mrs. Garcia's door close with reluctant finality, but she could sense the woman's continued presence behind her curtains. It was a small comfort to know that her neighbors were watching, that she and Max weren't completely alone in whatever was unfolding around them. Max shifted beside her, his training warring with his natural protective instincts. Sarah could feel the tension in his muscles, the way he positioned himself to maintain visual contact with the approaching figures while keeping his body between Sarah and any potential threat. His loyalty was absolute, even in the face of whatever had caused that terrible shock to course through his collar. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, scratching behind his ears in the way she knew calmed him. "We're going to be okay." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true. Nothing about this situation felt okay, and the electrical shock Max had received suggested that someone had been prepared for their presence on this street. The sound of footsteps on pavement grew closer, measured and deliberate. Sarah could distinguish at least 3 different sets of boots, each with a slightly different cadence and weight. They stopped approximately 10 feet away, close enough that she could hear the subtle sounds of equipment shifting and the quiet exchange of hand signals that she couldn't see but could somehow sense. Sarah Mitchell. The voice was male, probably middle-aged, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. When she didn't respond immediately, he repeated her name with more authority. "Sarah Mitchell, I need you to listen very carefully." Sarah's grip tightened on Max's harness. Her father had always taught her to be polite to adults, but every instinct she possessed was screaming that something was terribly wrong. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "What do you want with us?" "My name is Agent Rodriguez, and I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to ask you some questions about your activities today." The man's voice carried the kind of authority that made people comply automatically, but there was something else underneath it, a tension that suggested this situation was as unusual for him as it was for her. "FBI?" Sarah's mind reeled. What could the FBI possibly want with her? She was a 7th grader at Cedar Falls Middle School, whose biggest accomplishment this week had been finishing her science project on the water cycle. She volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends and helped Mrs. Patterson organize the children's section at the library. The most rebellious thing she'd ever done was stay up past her bedtime to finish a particularly good audiobook. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as confusion began to override fear. "I haven't done anything wrong. I was just at the library, and now I'm walking home with Max. We do this every Tuesday and Thursday." "We know about your library visits, Sarah," Agent Rodriguez replied, and there was something in his tone that made her blood run cold. How did they know about her routine? Had someone been watching her? The thought made her skin crawl. Max let out a low growl so quiet that only Sarah could hear it. She felt his muscles tense beneath her hand, and she knew he had sensed something that troubled him. Max had an uncanny ability to read people's intentions, and his reaction told her more than words could about the nature of the people surrounding them. "Sir, we have the perimeter secured," another voice reported, this one younger and less confident than Agent Rodriguez. "All civilians have been moved back to a safe distance, and the technical team is standing by." Technical team. Safe distance. Sarah's mind struggled to process the implications. What kind of situation required a technical team and civilian evacuation? She was sitting on a sidewalk with her guide dog, not handling dangerous materials or threatening national security. "Sarah, I need you to remain very still while we examine your dog's equipment," Agent Rodriguez continued. "There's been a security breach at a federal facility, and we have reason to believe that certain information may have been transmitted through unconventional means." The words washed over Sarah like ice water. Security breach. Federal facility. She had never been near any government buildings, except for the post office, when she mailed letters to her grandmother in Florida. The closest thing to a federal facility in Cedar Falls was the small Social Security office in the downtown area, and she'd never been there in her life. "I think there's been a mistake," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Max and I have just been to the library. We read books and do homework. We don't know anything about security breaches or federal facilities." But even as she spoke, a memory stirred in the back of her mind. Something that had happened at the library today. Something she hadn't thought much about at the time, but now seemed potentially significant. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned that there was a new volunteer helping with the computer systems, someone who had been updating the digital catalog and working on the library's network infrastructure. The volunteer had been friendly enough, asking Sarah about her reading preferences and her school schedule. He'd even complimented Max and asked about guide dog training. At the time, Sarah had been pleased by his interest, happy to share information about the incredible bond between working dogs and their handlers. Now, in the harsh light of federal agents and security breaches, she wondered if his questions had been more than casual curiosity. "Agent Rodriguez," the younger voice spoke up again, "the preliminary scan shows anomalous readings from the collar device. Definitely non-standard electronics embedded in what appears to be standard GPS tracking equipment." Sarah's heart sank. Max's collar did contain GPS tracking, a safety feature her parents had insisted on after hearing about guide dogs being stolen in larger cities. But anomalous readings, non-standard electronics? That made no sense unless someone had tampered with Max's collar without her knowledge. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Someone had used her, and Max had somehow involved them in whatever security breach the FBI was investigating. They had violated the trust of a blind child and her service animal, putting them both in danger for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. "Max," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "What have they done to you, boy?" The German Shepherd pressed closer to her side, his warm presence a reminder that no matter what had been done to his collar, his loyalty and love for her remained unchanged. Whatever sophisticated electronics might be hidden in his gear, Max was still the same dog who guided her safely through the world, who slept beside her bed every night, and who had become her most trusted companion. Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled to life, and Sarah heard fragments of conversation that made her stomach clench even tighter. Receiving active transmissions. Data package still intact. Need to maintain containment until tech team can extract. Sarah realized with growing horror that she and Max weren't just witnesses to whatever had happened. They were evidence. The word evidence hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Sarah felt the weight of its implications settling over her like a heavy blanket. She wasn't just an innocent bystander caught up in something beyond her understanding. She and Max had somehow become central to a federal investigation. The thought made her feel small and vulnerable, but also sparked a flame of indignation that surprised her with its intensity. From behind the windows and doors of Maple Street, Sarah could sense the growing unrest of her neighbors. The forced evacuation of Mrs. Garcia had clearly not sat well with the tight-knit community, and she could hear whispered conversations floating on the autumn air. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other, where a child in trouble became everyone's concern, and where federal agents treating a 12-year-old girl like a suspect was bound to ruffle feathers. "This is ridiculous," came a voice from the direction of the Henderson house. Sarah recognized the gravelly tone of Mr. Peterson, the retired Marine who lived 2 doors down from her family. "That girl has been walking this street for 3 years. She's about as dangerous as a butterfly." "Keep your voice down, Harold," Mrs. Henderson hissed, but Sarah could hear the anger in the elderly woman's voice as well. "They've got some kind of fancy equipment out there, and they're treating little Sarah like she's a terrorist." Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled again, and Sarah caught fragments of conversation that made her increasingly uneasy. Civilian interference becoming a factor. Recommend expedited extraction. Media blackout still holding. Media blackout? Sarah's mind raced. What kind of situation required keeping the press away? She thought of her parents, both at work and unaware that their daughter was sitting on a sidewalk surrounded by federal agents. Her mother worked as a nurse at Cedar Falls General Hospital, and her father was a mechanical engineer at the John Deere plant. They would be expecting her home within the hour, and when she didn't arrive, they would start to worry. "Agent Rodriguez," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, "my parents don't know where I am. They'll be worried if I don't come home soon. Can someone call them and let them know I'm okay?" There was a pause before the agent responded, and Sarah didn't like the quality of that silence. "Your parents have been notified of the situation, Sarah. They're being briefed by other members of our team." The bottom dropped out of Sarah's stomach. Other members of their team? How many people were involved in this operation? And what exactly were they telling her parents? She imagined her mother's panic, her father's protective anger, and felt tears begin to build behind her closed eyelids. Max sensed her distress and shifted closer, his warm weight against her leg, a comforting reminder that she wasn't alone. Despite whatever electronics had been hidden in his collar, despite being used as an unwitting courier, Max remained exactly what he had always been, her loyal companion and protector. "Sarah, honey, can you hear me?" The voice came from much closer than the other neighbors, and Sarah turned her head toward the sound. It was Mrs. Williams from next door, the kindergarten teacher who had helped Sarah's family when they first moved to Maple Street. "Mom, please step back," Agent Rodriguez commanded, but Mrs. Williams's response was sharp and immediate. "I most certainly will not step back. That child has been my neighbor for 3 years, and I'm not about to let a bunch of federal agents terrorize her without someone she trusts nearby." Sarah heard the sound of the woman's sensible shoes on pavement as she moved closer despite the agent's objections. "This is an active federal investigation," Agent Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Civilian interference could compromise national security." "National security!" Mrs. Williams' laugh was bitter. That child couldn't compromise a bake sale, let alone national security. She reads books about horses and helps elderly people at the library. If you think she's a threat to anything except your overinflated sense of importance, you're even more foolish than you look. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of more neighbors approaching, their footsteps creating a chorus of solidarity that made her heart swell with gratitude. These people had watched her grow up, had celebrated her achievements, and supported her through challenges. They knew who she really was, and they weren't about to let federal agents treat her like a criminal without a fight. Agent Rodriguez, the younger voice, spoke up nervously. We're getting multiple civilian approaches. Should we expand the perimeter? Sarah could hear the uncertainty in the young agent's voice, and she realized that this situation was as uncomfortable for some of the federal personnel as it was for her. They had probably expected to conduct their investigation quietly, without community interference or the protective instincts of small-town neighbors. Everyone just needs to calm down, Agent Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. We're not here to harm anyone. We're investigating a serious security breach, and Sarah may have information that could help us recover stolen intelligence. Stolen intelligence? Mr. Peterson's voice boomed with incredulity. From a blind kid and her service dog? Do you hear how crazy that sounds? But as crazy as it sounded, Sarah was beginning to piece together the fragments of what might have happened. The friendly volunteer at the library who had asked so many questions about her routine. The way he had shown particular interest in Max's collar and GPS tracking system. The timing of today's library visit, which had been specifically arranged because Mrs. Patterson had mentioned needing help with the new computer updates. Someone had used her predictable schedule and her trust to turn Max's collar into a delivery system for stolen information. The thought made her feel sick and angry in equal measure. They had violated not just her privacy, but the sacred bond between a guide dog and his handler. They had turned Max into an unwitting accomplice and put both of them in danger. Mrs. Williams, Sarah called out, her voice stronger now despite the tears that threatened to fall. I think I might know what happened, but I need to tell my parents first, and I need to make sure Max is okay before anyone touches his collar. Of course, sweetheart, Mrs. Williams replied, and Sarah could hear her moving even closer despite the agent's continued objections. No one's going to hurt Max. We won't let them. The solidarity of her neighbors gave Sarah strength she didn't know she possessed. These people had welcomed her family to Cedar Falls, had treated her not as a disabled child to be pitied, but as a valued member of their community. They had celebrated when she mastered new routes around town, had cheered at her school science fair presentations, and had always made sure she felt included in neighborhood activities. Agent Rodriguez, Sarah said, her voice carrying a new note of determination. I want to help you find whoever did this to us, but I want my parents here, and I want someone I trust to make sure Max isn't hurt when you remove whatever's in his collar. She heard whispered conversations among the agents, radio communications that she couldn't quite make out, and the continued approach of more neighbors who were clearly unwilling to let federal authorities handle one of their own without oversight. We can arrange for your parents to be present, Agent Rodriguez finally said, though his tone suggested the concession was reluctant. And we'll have a veterinarian examine your dog to ensure his safety during the procedure. It wasn't everything Sarah wanted, but it was a start. Max pressed against her leg, his steady breathing a reminder that whatever had been done to them, they had survived it together. And with the protective circle of their neighbors around them, Sarah began to believe they might just make it through whatever came next. The autumn wind continued to rustle the leaves, but now it carried something different, the sound of a community. refusing to abandon one of its own, and the quiet strength of a young girl who was learning that even in the face of federal investigations and stolen intelligence, she didn't have to face the world alone. The sound of a car engine approaching at high speed cut through the tense standoff on Maple Street, followed immediately by the screech of brakes and the slam of car doors. Sarah's heart leaped as she recognized her father's hurried footsteps and her mother's voice calling her name with barely controlled panic. "Sarah, baby, are you okay?" Jennifer Mitchell's voice cracked with emotion as she rushed toward her daughter, only to be intercepted by one of the federal agents. "Ma'am, please maintain a safe distance while we secure the scene," the agent said, but David Mitchell's response was immediate and forceful. "That's our daughter, and we're not maintaining any distance," Sarah's father declared, his engineer's logical mind clearly struggling to process the scene before him. "What the hell is going on here? Why are federal agents surrounding my 12-year-old daughter?" Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his voice taking on the practiced tone of someone accustomed to delivering difficult briefings to worried families. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. Your daughter and her service dog have inadvertently become involved in a federal investigation. We need to examine the dog's collar and questioning system to recover some stolen intelligence." "Stolen intelligence?" Jennifer's voice rose to a pitch that made several neighbors wince in sympathy. "From Sarah? Are you people insane? She's a child. She reads books and helps at the library." Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for her mother's fierce protectiveness, but she also heard the underlying fear in her voice. Her parents had worked so hard to help her build an independent life after losing her sight, and now that independence was being threatened by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "Mom, Dad, I'm okay," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the artificial barrier the agents had tried to maintain. "Max got shocked somehow, but we're both all right. I think someone put something in his collar without us knowing." David Mitchell's footsteps approached despite the agent's continued objections, and Sarah heard the familiar sound of her father's measured breathing as he knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, his hand finding her shoulder. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" The simple question, asked in her father's calm, problem-solving tone, helped Sarah organize her thoughts. She took a deep breath and began to recount the afternoon's events, starting with her normal library visit and ending with the electrical shock that had alerted the authorities to whatever was hidden in Max's collar. "There was a new volunteer at the library today," Sarah explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "He asked a lot of questions about Max and our routine. Mrs. Patterson introduced him as someone helping with the computer systems. He seemed really interested in how guide dogs work, and especially in Max's GPS collar." Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled to life, and Sarah heard a woman's voice reporting, "We've identified the subject. Thomas Bradley, former IT contractor with Level 2 security clearance, terminated 3 months ago for unauthorized access attempts, currently wanted in connection with the Riverside Research Facility breach." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Sarah remembered the volunteer's questions about her schedule, his interest in the GPS tracking system, and the way he had lingered near Max while she was focused on her audiobook. He had used her trust and her routine to plant whatever device was now causing all this trouble. "So someone used my daughter as an unwitting courier," David Mitchell said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They violated the trust of a disabled child to steal government secrets." "That appears to be the case," Agent Rodriguez admitted, and Sarah detected a note of discomfort in his voice. "The subject appears to have chosen Sarah because her routine was predictable and because a guide dog's collar would be an unlikely place for security personnel to look for stolen data," Jennifer Mitchell's sharp intake of breath spoke volumes about her thoughts on someone targeting her daughter. How did you find out? How did you know to look for Sarah? We tracked the signal, the younger agent explained. The stolen data was being transmitted in short bursts every few hours. Our technical team triangulated the source to this neighborhood, and additional surveillance confirmed the signal was moving with your daughter's daily route. Mrs. Williams, who had remained steadfastly at the edge of the federal perimeter, spoke up with teacher-like authority. So you've been watching Sarah without her knowledge, following a child around town? We've been tracking an electronic signal, Agent Rodriguez corrected, but the distinction seemed weak in the face of the community's growing outrage. Once we identified the source, we had to act quickly to recover the stolen intelligence before it could be transmitted to foreign contacts. Foreign contacts? Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Iowa autumn air. She had unknowingly been carrying stolen government secrets that were apparently valuable enough to interest foreign agents. The thought made her feel sick and angry and somehow violated in a way that went beyond the simple invasion of privacy. Max whimpered softly beside her, and Sarah realized the German Shepherd had been absorbing the tension of the entire situation. Guide dogs were trained to remain calm in stressful situations, but even Max's remarkable training had limits. The electrical shock, the crowd of strangers, and Sarah's own distress were taking their toll on her loyal companion. We need to get whatever's in his collar removed, Sarah said firmly. Max doesn't understand what's happening, and this is scaring him. He's been my partner for 3 years, and he doesn't deserve to be caught up in this mess. Dr. Emily Carter, the veterinarian, who had been called to examine Max, approached with gentle confidence. Sarah had met her before during Max's regular checkups, and the woman's calm presence was a welcome relief from the tension of federal agents and electronic surveillance. "Hello, Sarah," Dr. Carter said warmly. "I'm going to take a very careful look at Max's collar and make sure he's not hurt by whatever's been attached to it. Can you tell me if he's been behaving differently lately?" Sarah thought back over the past few days, searching her memory for any signs that Max might have been uncomfortable or confused. "He seemed a little restless yesterday evening," she admitted. "And this morning, he kept sniffing at his collar, like something was bothering him. That's probably when the device was activated for longer transmissions," Agent Rodriguez explained. "The subject likely programmed it to begin more frequent data bursts once the initial contact was established." Dr. Carter's examination was thorough but gentle, her experienced hands checking Max's neck and collar for any signs of irritation or injury. "There's definitely something attached to the standard GPS unit," she reported. "It's been very carefully integrated, but I can remove it without any harm to Max." "How long will that take?" Jennifer asked, her arm wrapping protectively around Sarah's shoulders. "About 15 minutes, Dr. Carter replied. "I'll need to sedate Max lightly just to keep him calm while I work. Sarah, would you like to stay with him during the procedure?" Sarah nodded immediately. The thought of leaving Max alone during a medical procedure was unthinkable, especially after everything they had been through together. "I want to be right there with him," she said. "He'll be calmer if I'm nearby." As Dr. Carter prepared her equipment, Sarah became aware of a change in the atmosphere around them. The federal agents were still present, still maintaining their perimeter, but the arrival of her parents and the prospect of resolving the situation had shifted the dynamic from confrontation to cooperation. Mr. Peterson's voice carried from the Hendersons' front yard, where several neighbors had gathered to watch the proceedings. "That's how you handle a problem," he said approvingly. "You get the right people involved and you solve it properly without terrorizing children." Sarah smiled despite everything. Her neighbors' support had been unwavering, and their presence had helped ensure that she and Max were treated with dignity, rather than simply processed as evidence in a federal investigation. Cedar Falls might be a small town, but it took care of its own. Dr. Carter worked with the practiced efficiency that came from years of veterinary experience, her gentle hands carefully examining every inch of Max's collar while the German Shepherd lay peacefully under light sedation. Sarah knelt beside her companion, one hand resting on his flank so she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing and reassure herself that he was safe. "It's quite sophisticated," Dr. Carter murmured as she worked, her voice carrying a note of professional admiration mixed with concern. Whoever attached this knew exactly what they were doing. It's been integrated into the existing GPS unit so seamlessly that a casual inspection would never detect it. Agent Rodriguez leaned closer, his earlier authoritative demeanor replaced by genuine curiosity about the technical aspects of the device. "Can you tell how long it's been there?" "Based on the slight wear patterns around the attachment points, I'd estimate 3 to 4 days, Dr. Carter replied, her magnifying glass reflecting the afternoon light as she examined the collar's components. "The integration is so clean that Max probably didn't even notice when it was installed." Sarah's mind raced back to the previous weekend, trying to remember when someone might have had access to Max's collar. Then it hit her with sickening clarity. "The Pet Wash fundraiser," she said quietly. "Last Saturday at the library, they had a volunteer dog grooming station to raise money for the animal shelter. Max got a bath and his collar was cleaned." Her parents exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't see but could feel in the quality of their silence. The fundraiser had been advertised throughout Cedar Falls as a community service project, with local volunteers donating their time to help pet owners while raising money for a good cause. It had seemed like exactly the kind of wholesome community activity that made their town special. Thomas Bradley was listed as one of the volunteer groomers, Agent Rodriguez confirmed, his voice grim as he consulted his notes. He had perfect access to Max's collar for approximately 30 minutes during the grooming session. Jennifer Mitchell's voice shook with barely controlled fury. "He used a charity fundraiser to target our daughter. He manipulated a community service project to involve innocent people in espionage." "It appears so," Agent Rodriguez admitted. Bradley's background check showed he had been involved with several local volunteer organizations over the past 6 months. "We believe he was specifically looking for opportunities to establish contact with potential unwitting couriers." The implications were staggering. Sarah realized that she and Max hadn't been randomly selected victims, but carefully chosen targets. Bradley had studied the community, identified her predictable routine, and then inserted himself into her life in the most innocent way possible. The violation felt personal and deeply disturbing. "There," Dr. Carter announced with satisfaction as she carefully extracted a device no larger than a quarter from Max's collar. "The little fellow is completely fine, and this nasty piece of technology is out of his life for good." The device looked deceptively innocent, a thin disc of dark metal with what appeared to be microscopic circuitry etched into its surface. It was hard to believe that something so small could have caused such an enormous disruption to their quiet lives. "That's it?" David Mitchell asked incredulously. "That tiny thing was broadcasting stolen government secrets?" "Modern technology is quite remarkable," Agent Rodriguez explained as he carefully secured the device in a specialized containment unit. This particular unit could store and transmit several terabytes of data while appearing to be nothing more than a backup battery. For the GPS system, Sarah felt Max beginning to stir as the sedation wore off, and she leaned down to whisper reassurances in his ear. "It's okay, boy. The bad thing is gone now. You're safe." Max's tail wagged weakly in response to her voice, and she knew he was going to be perfectly fine. Dr. Carter completed her examination with a thorough check of Max's vital signs and reflexes. "He's in excellent health," she announced. "The device didn't interfere with any of his natural functions, and there's no sign of irritation or injury. This beautiful boy should be back to his normal self within an hour." The collective sigh of relief from the gathered neighbors was audible even from Sarah's position on the ground. She realized that the entire community had been holding its breath, waiting to learn whether Max had been harmed by his unwitting involvement in federal espionage. "So what happens now?" Mrs. Williams asked from her position at the edge of the federal perimeter. "Are you people going to continue treating Sarah like a suspect, or can we finally acknowledge that she and Max are victims in this situation?" Agent Rodriguez's radio crackled with an urgent message that made him step away for a private conversation. Sarah could hear fragments of the discussion, words like "successful recovery" and "suspect apprehended," that suggested the investigation was reaching its conclusion. When he returned, Agent Rodriguez's entire demeanor had changed. The authoritative federal agent had been replaced by something closer to the community public servant Sarah had hoped to encounter from the beginning. "Thomas Bradley has been taken into custody," he announced. "The stolen data has been recovered, and preliminary analysis suggests no foreign transmission occurred." The news rippled through the gathering like a wave of relief. Sarah felt her mother's arm tighten around her shoulders, and her father's hand found the top of her head in a gesture of comfort and protection that she had known since childhood. "This means Sarah is no longer considered part of an active investigation?" David Mitchell asked, his engineer's precision evident in the carefully worded question. "That's correct," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "Sarah and Max were unknowing victims of Bradley's scheme. They will not face any charges or restrictions, and their involvement in this matter is officially concluded." Sarah heard Mrs. Henderson's screen door slam open, followed by the elderly woman's triumphant declaration, "I told you people that child was innocent. Anyone with half a brain could see she wouldn't hurt a fly." Despite everything they had been through, Sarah couldn't help but smile at Mrs. Henderson's vindication. The elderly woman had been one of her strongest supporters from the moment the federal agents arrived, and her unwavering faith in Sarah's innocence had been both touching and empowering. Max struggled to his feet, still slightly unsteady from the sedation, but clearly eager to resume his duties as Sarah's guide and protector. She helped him stand, checking his balance and making sure he was comfortable before allowing him to bear any weight. "How are you feeling, buddy?" she asked, running her hands through his thick coat to check for any signs of discomfort. Max leaned into her touch, his tail wagging with increasing enthusiasm as the effects of the sedation continued to fade. "He looks great," Dr. Carter observed with professional satisfaction. "I'd recommend keeping his activity light for the rest of the day, but he should be completely back to normal by tomorrow morning." Agent Rodriguez approached with what Sarah sensed was genuine contrition. "Sarah, I want to apologize for the way this situation unfolded. Federal investigations can sometimes seem impersonal and intimidating, but please know that everyone involved recognized you were an innocent victim from the very beginning." Sarah considered his words carefully before responding. "I understand. You were doing your job," she said finally. "But next time something like this happens, maybe you could explain what's going on before surrounding someone with federal agents. It was really scary not knowing what we had done wrong." "That's excellent advice," Agent Rodriguez acknowledged. "We'll definitely take your feedback into consideration for future operations involving civilian contacts." As the federal agents began packing their equipment and dismantling the perimeter they had established around Maple Street, Sarah realized that her ordinary Tuesday afternoon had become something extraordinary. She had been unknowingly involved in federal espionage, had discovered the power of community support, and had learned that even in the most frightening circumstances, she and Max could face whatever came their way together. As the federal agents completed their departure from Maple Street, Sarah found herself at the center of a very different kind of gathering. Her neighbors, who had maintained their protective vigil throughout the afternoon's drama, were now converging with the warm enthusiasm of a community celebration. The contrast between the cold efficiency of the federal investigation and the genuine warmth of small-town concern couldn't have been more striking. "Sarah, honey, you must be exhausted," Mrs. Williams said, her teacher's voice carrying the same gentle authority she used with her kindergarten students. "Why don't you and Max come sit on my porch while your parents handle the remaining paperwork?" The suggestion was immediately echoed by several other neighbors. Mrs. Garcia offered to bring fresh lemonade, Mr. Peterson volunteered to check Max's water bowl, and Mrs. Henderson was already heading inside to retrieve what she called her emergency comfort cookies from the freezer. Sarah's parents exchanged a look that she interpreted as a mixture of gratitude and amazement. In the 3 years since moving to Cedar Falls, they had certainly experienced the town's friendly nature. But today's events had revealed a depth of community loyalty that went far beyond casual neighborliness. "Actually," Jennifer Mitchell said, her voice still shaky from the afternoon's stress, "I think we'd all benefit from some time to decompress together. Sarah, would you like to invite everyone over for an impromptu gathering? I think we could all use some normal social interaction after this afternoon." The invitation was immediately and enthusiastically accepted. Within minutes, the same stretch of Maple Street that had been cordoned off by federal agents was buzzing with the activity of neighbors organizing an impromptu block party. Sarah found herself seated in her family's front yard, Max resting comfortably beside her chair as the community rallied around them with food, drinks, and the kind of emotional support that couldn't be quantified or replicated. As Sarah listened to the conversations swirling around her, she began to understand that today's events had affected more than just her family. The federal investigation had forced the entire neighborhood to confront the reality that their quiet street could become a focal point for national security concerns, that their sense of safety and predictability could be disrupted by forces completely beyond their control. "I keep thinking about how scared you must have been," Mrs. Garcia said, settling into a lawn chair beside Sarah. "To have all those agents surrounding you and not understanding why. You handled yourself with such maturity, mija." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment, but also a lingering sense of vulnerability. "I was scared," she admitted. "But mostly I was worried about Max. When he got shocked, I thought someone was trying to hurt him, and I couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt a guide dog. That Bradley character is lucky he's in federal custody," Mr. Peterson growled from his position near the refreshment table that seemed to be materializing through neighborly magic. "If I'd gotten my hands on someone who used a charity event to target a child and her service animal, there would have been consequences." David Mitchell, who was helping to set up additional seating, paused in his work to address the retired Marine. "Harold, I can't tell you how much it means to know that Sarah has neighbors like you watching out for her. When Jennifer and I are at work, knowing that she's surrounded by people who care about her safety makes all the difference." The conversation gradually shifted from the afternoon's drama to broader discussions about community, safety, and the unexpected ways that ordinary people could become involved in extraordinary circumstances. Sarah found herself sharing details about her guide dog training, explaining how Max had been taught to handle various emergency situations and describing the bond that had developed between them over 3 years of partnership. "I never really understood how guide dogs work," admitted Tommy Sullivan, a high school student who lived across the street. "I mean, I knew they helped blind people get around, but I didn't realize how much training goes into it or how much trust is involved." Sarah smiled, always happy to educate people about the realities of working with a guide dog. "Max had 2 years of training before he was matched with me," she explained. "He learned to judge heights and distances, to avoid obstacles, to stop at curbs and stairs, and to disobey commands that would put me in danger. That's called intelligent disobedience, and it's one of the most important things a guide dog learns." "Like today," Mrs. Henderson observed. "When that device shocked him, he still stayed right beside you to protect you." The observation brought Sarah's attention back to Max, who was indeed staying closer than usual, as if the afternoon's events had reinforced his protective instincts. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he leaned into her touch, with the contentment of a dog who knew he was exactly where he belonged. Dr. Carter, who had remained to monitor Max's recovery from the sedation, provided a professional update that reassured everyone present. "His vital signs are completely normal, and his responses to stimuli are exactly what I'd expect from a healthy, well-trained working dog. The device removal was successful, and there's no lasting impact from today's experience." As the impromptu gathering continued, Sarah became aware of an unexpected silver lining to the day's traumatic events. The federal investigation had brought her neighbors together in a way that normal community activities never had. They had seen her not as the disabled child who needed special consideration, but as a valued member of their community who deserved their protection and support. "Sarah," Mrs. Williams said thoughtfully, "have you ever considered that what happened today might actually be a good thing in the long run?" The suggestion seemed outrageous at first, but as Mrs. Williams continued, Sarah began to understand her perspective. "I don't mean the espionage or the fear," Mrs. Williams clarified quickly. "I mean the way everyone came together, the way the community showed its true character. You've seen what it looks like when people you've known for years are willing to stand up for you against federal agents. That's not something everyone gets to experience." Sarah considered the teacher's words as conversations continued around her. It was true that today had revealed something special about Cedar Falls and Maple Street specifically. Her neighbors hadn't just expressed concern from behind their windows. They had physically positioned themselves between her and what they perceived as a threat. They had refused to be intimidated by federal authority when they believed one of their own was being treated unfairly. "Plus," Tommy Sullivan added, with the insight that sometimes came from teenagers, "you're probably going to be famous around school. How many kids can say they were accidentally involved in a federal espionage case?" The thought made Sarah laugh for the first time since the afternoon's drama began. She could indeed imagine the reactions of her classmates when they heard about her adventure. Cedar Falls Middle School had never had a student who was even remotely connected to FBI investigations, and the story would probably grow more dramatic with each retelling. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Maple Street, Sarah realized that her perspective on the day's events was beginning to shift. What had started as a terrifying experience was becoming a story of community strength, unexpected adventure, and the revelation that she and Max were surrounded by people who would go to extraordinary lengths to protect them. "You know what?" Sarah announced to the group, her voice carrying a new note of confidence. "Mrs. Williams is right. Today was scary, but it also showed me something important about where we live and who our neighbors really are. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'm glad I know what it feels like to have an entire community willing to stand up for me." The chorus of agreement and affection that followed her statement confirmed what Sarah was beginning to understand. Today hadn't just been about federal investigations and stolen intelligence. It had been about the power of community, the strength that came from knowing you weren't alone, and the remarkable things that could happen when ordinary people decided that protecting each other was more important than avoiding trouble. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself walking the familiar route to the Cedar Falls Public Library, but everything felt different now. The same oak trees lined Maple Street, the same neighbors waved from their porches, and Max moved with his characteristic confidence as he guided her along the sidewalk. Yet somehow, the world had expanded in ways that went far beyond the physical boundaries of her small Iowa town. The library itself had undergone some changes since the Bradley incident. As the local newspaper had dubbed it, Mrs. Patterson had implemented new volunteer screening procedures, and the entire computer system had been updated with enhanced security measures. But more importantly, Sarah's relationship with the library had evolved from that of a regular patron to something approaching local celebrity status. "Sarah," Mrs. Patterson's voice carried genuine excitement as they entered the building. "Perfect timing. I have something special to show you today." Max led Sarah to the circulation desk, where the familiar sounds and smells of the library welcomed them like an old friend. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows, the quiet rustling of pages being turned, and the soft click of keyboards created the peaceful atmosphere that had always made the library Sarah's favorite place in Cedar Falls. "The Cedar Falls Gazette wants to do a feature story about what happened," Mrs. Patterson explained, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "They're calling it Community Courage, how Maple Street neighbors protected one of their own. They want to interview you and several of your neighbors about the importance of community solidarity." The idea of being interviewed by the local newspaper was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Sarah had become accustomed to being known around town as the girl with the guide dog, but being recognized as someone who had played a role in a federal investigation was entirely new territory. "They also want to do an educational piece about guide dogs," Mrs. Patterson continued. "The reporter thinks your experience could help people understand the incredible bond between working dogs and their handlers, and the importance of never interfering with service animals." Sarah smiled at the suggestion. Since the incident with the concealed device, she had received numerous questions from community members about Max's training, their partnership, and the ways that guide dogs help their handlers navigate the world safely. She had discovered that she enjoyed educating people about the realities of living with a visual impairment and the remarkable capabilities of working dogs. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Sarah replied. "There are so many misconceptions about what guide dogs do and how people should interact with them. If our story can help people understand better, then something good will have come from what happened." As they settled into Sarah's usual study area, Mrs. Patterson mentioned another development that had emerged from the Bradley incident. "The state's guide dog training organization contacted us after hearing about what happened. They want to use your experience as part of their public education program. Apparently, incidents involving service animals being used without their handlers' knowledge are more common than most people realize." The information was both disturbing and validating. Sarah had wondered if she and Max had been uniquely targeted, or if their experience was part of a larger pattern of exploitation. Learning that other service animals had been similarly victimized made her feel less isolated, while also strengthening her resolve to help prevent future incidents. Max settled beside her chair with the contentment of a dog who was exactly where he belonged. The German Shepherd had recovered completely from his brief involvement in federal espionage, showing no lasting effects from either the electrical shock or the sedation required for device removal. If anything, he seemed more protective than before, staying closer to Sarah's side and showing heightened awareness of their surroundings. "Agent Rodriguez called yesterday," Mrs. Patterson mentioned casually as she helped Sarah organize her homework materials. "He wanted to make sure you were doing well and to let you know that Thomas Bradley has been formally charged with multiple federal offenses. Apparently, your case was just one of several involving stolen intelligence and unwitting couriers." Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at the news. Satisfaction that Bradley would face consequences for his actions, but sadness that someone had been willing to exploit innocent people and their beloved animals for criminal purposes. She thought about the Pet Wash fundraiser, which had been intended to help homeless animals, and how Bradley had corrupted that genuine community service for his own illegal purposes. "Has the library decided whether to continue hosting community fundraisers?" Sarah asked, concerned that Bradley's actions might have damaged the library's willingness to serve as a gathering place for charitable activities. "Absolutely," Mrs. Patterson replied with characteristic determination. "We're not going to let one bad actor prevent us from supporting our community. We're just implementing better screening procedures and working with local law enforcement to ensure volunteer events remain safe for everyone involved." As Sarah worked on her homework, she became aware of how much her confidence had grown since the incident on Maple Street. The experience of being thrust into an adult situation involving federal investigations and national security had forced her to find reserves of strength and maturity she hadn't known she possessed. She had learned to advocate for herself and Max, to speak up when she felt they were being treated unfairly, and to trust in the support of the community around them. Tommy Sullivan appeared at their table, carrying a stack of books that Sarah recognized by the distinctive sound they made when he set them down. "Hey, Sarah," he said with the easy familiarity that had developed since the block party following the federal investigation. "I brought those books about working dogs that you recommended. My little sister is thinking about volunteer work at the animal shelter, and I wanted to learn more about how service animals are trained." The conversation that followed was one of many that Sarah had found herself having over the past 3 weeks. The incident had sparked genuine curiosity throughout Cedar Falls about guide dogs, service animals, and the broader community of people with disabilities. What had started as a traumatic experience was gradually becoming an opportunity for education and increased understanding. "Sarah," Mrs. Patterson said as the afternoon study session drew to a close, "there's one more thing I wanted to discuss with you. The library board has been talking about creating a new volunteer position specifically focused on accessibility and community outreach. We were wondering if you might be interested in helping us develop programs that would make the library even more welcoming to patrons with various disabilities." The offer was unexpected and deeply flattering. Sarah had always loved the library, but the idea of helping to shape its services for other people with disabilities was incredibly appealing. She thought about all the small accommodations that made her library visits successful: the audio equipment, the accessible seating, and Mrs. Patterson's patient assistance with research projects. "I would love to help with that," Sarah replied immediately. "There are probably lots of ways to make the library more accessible that people don't think about unless they've experienced those challenges themselves." As they prepared to leave, Sarah realized that her Tuesday afternoon library visits had become even more meaningful than before. What had once been simply a routine for homework and reading was now an opportunity to contribute to her community in ways she had never imagined possible. Max led her confidently toward the exit, his step sure and his attention focused on their path home. The familiar route along 3rd Street to Maple Street stretched ahead of them, but Sarah no longer thought of it as just the way to and from the library. It was the path that had led them through an extraordinary adventure, had revealed the strength of their community, and had opened new doors for their future. As they approached the corner where the electrical shock had first alerted federal agents to the device in Max's collar, Sarah paused to reflect on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. The sidewalk looked exactly the same, but her understanding of herself, her community, and her place in the world had been fundamentally altered. "Come on, Max," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that would have been impossible to imagine just a month ago. "Let's go home." The German shepherd's tail wagged once in acknowledgement, and together they continued down Maple Street, where neighbors waved from their porches and the late afternoon sun filtered through the oak trees just as it always had. But now Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she and Max were walking through a community that would protect them, support them, and celebrate their achievements no matter what challenges the future might bring. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah and Max's extraordinary story has touched your hearts and opened your eyes to the incredible power of community solidarity. This tale of a young girl, her loyal guide dog, and the neighbors who refused to let federal agents intimidate an innocent child reminds us that true strength often comes not from individual heroism, but from ordinary people deciding to stand together when it matters most. If this story moved you, we invite you to explore our special playlist of equally captivating narratives that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the unbreakable bonds we form with both our communities and our beloved animal companions. You can find it by clicking the link to your left, where more heartwarming stories await your discovery. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed following Sarah's journey from frightened victim to confident community advocate. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the beautiful complexity of life, the unexpected ways that ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, and the remarkable things that happen when communities choose compassion over indifference. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these meaningful narratives that remind us of our shared humanity. We would love to hear your thoughts about Sarah's story in the comments below. Have you ever experienced the protective power of community during a difficult time? Do you have a special bond with a service animal or beloved pet? Your stories and reflections make our community stronger, and we read every comment with genuine interest and appreciation. Don't miss our upcoming content, where we'll continue exploring the incredible ways that ordinary people navigate extraordinary challenges with courage, creativity, and the support of those who care about them. Until next time, remember that every community has the power to be a Maple Street, and every neighbor has the potential to be a protector when someone needs them most. We'll see you in the comments.